Welcome everyone to the second panel today. This panel is called Transitioning Experiments, and we will have again an interdisciplinary round of speakers. They are Igor Grubic, Francisco Martinez, and Michal Murawski, and I will introduce them in turn. And the aim of panel 2 is to examine post-communist places as contradictory and liminal sites, which on the one hand create a counter-hegemonic environment for melancholic preservations of lost modern collectives and ideals, while on the other hand being sites for creative forgetting and forward-looking practices. And our first speaker is Igor Grubic. He's one of Croatia's most accomplished and internationally acclaimed artists. His work includes interventions in public spaces, photography and film, and his work, of which he will speaking, Traces of Disappearing in 3 acts, represented Croatia at the 58th Venice Biennale. And as Igor has a new exhibition being opened right now, he unfortunately can't be here in person today, but he has recorded a video where he talks about his work. And I'm hoping, Lou, you can help us broadcast Igor's video.
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you.
Hello to everyone. I will present the project Traces of Disappearing of 3 acts, which is a photographic essay and one animated film, which I was creating during a 13 years long process. So in this photographic essay, I was focused on the transition of the area of the ex-Yugoslav countries, transition process from war, transitional process from one social system into another one, from liberal socialism into the brutal capitalism, and how the things was going on during the process in privatization. So in all these 3 photographic essays, somehow I was following the transformation of the urban landscape under the pressure of capital. So in first photographic essay, which is called Wild House, I was following the one community of the homeless people, which were live on the suburb of the city of Zagreb, and they was existing almost like in ideal utopian way by helping each other in solidarity, working for common good, creating wild gardenings there for each other, and helping to building these wild houses the same to each other. And in these 13 years then happened that because of the gentrification, some investments come and they bought the land for building shopping centers, and slowly this kind of free utopian zone slowly starting to disappear. And through this process, they also demolished their houses. In the photographic essay by the name Filigree Sidewalk, I was focused on transformation of urban landscape and actually how the craftsman stores in the center of the city slowly starting to disappear, also because of the pressure of the capital. So as we know, the center of each city is almost fully creative zone, and this creative zone in this transformation slowly starting to become like a services zone, and these slow little craftsman stores slowly starting to transform into restaurants, clubs, and the bars. So through this, I wanted to show how the creativity also, and working somehow also for common good in the centers of the cities, slowly transform into service activities. In the third photographic essay, which I call the construction of the factory, I was focusing on disappearing of industrial zone in the city, and how the factory is slowly starting to be abandoned, demolished, because of the interest of the investors. And I wanted to show through this photographic essay, the third one also, how in socialism worker was somehow the basement of the society, the base of the society, and how slowly these workers' rights, also ideas of the solidarity and working for common good, and the care for the workers, because the workers was the fundaments of the society, are slowly in this transitional process, the privatization process, slowly these ideas been abandoned. In socialism, the worker was, as I mentioned, fundamental society, so workers were celebrated, and stories of workers was present in the media, newspapers, television, but nowadays these stories completely disappear. Through all these photographic essays, I was following the story only through the architecture, so there is no persons in the photographs, but the personal stories from the workers, craftsmen, or homeless people are present in the text. So together with the photographs and with the text, I tried to create some kind of complementary content that they are supplement somehow, and that viewer can create his own reading of this, full reading somehow through this narrative. All these three photographic essays are created in a dramaturgical way, like some kind of storyboards. So the animated film, which is titled How Steel Was Tempered, speaks about the destinies of the people from the photographs. So in a certain way, I choose animation because I wanted to rise this story in a abstract way, somehow in an archetypal way. So I created archetypes of the father and son, which are going on the abandoned factory where father once lived, worked, and this is abandoned, demolished, ruined, empty factory, and we can see that somehow father and son are not completely in a communication. So father is in a certain kind of a trauma because he lost a father figure. He lost a position where he is a protector of the family and someone who feeds the family, and he is somehow traumatized. Through their, how to say, stalking through these empty factory halls, they find some abandoned films. So we could see the images of the dream which one was existed in the socialist society, and the belief that they are building a better future. So through these images, we can somehow observe what is going on in his head, and we can see, reflect through this certain trauma because of that's what he was lost. And in one moment, father get to idea that he can put a fire in the furnace of the factory which is not working. And through this creative gesture, to this creative act, which is like some art gesture, artistical gesture, or performative gesture, that he enlightened, that he put a fire in the factory which is not working. Like through the game, he started to attract the attention of his son, and the son decided to join him in this game. And through this gesture that they are putting the coal together in the furnace which is in the factory which was not working, through this gesture they again become closer. Through this gesture also father get de-traumatized, he rid of his personal trauma. I wanted to show through this scene somehow in a very strong symbolical way that this is also a certain kind of possible therapeutic gesture. This creative gesture, like seemingly absurd gesture or nonsense gesture, are also gestures of the performance, but they have a very strong symbolical content. And through this, I wanted to show also somehow that if we practice this creativity in everyday life, if we create a game in everyday life, we somehow exercise this non-attachment distinctive view on our identity. So if we practice this non-attachment view, we will not perceive our identity or context in which we are living in a so traumatic or tragical way. All these ideas was somehow present also during this pandemic or period, when all of us been closed in the quarantines. We could see that all these leftist ideas of the social democracy are becoming again alive and quite present. Ideas of solidarity, working for common good, and need for a health care system equal for everyone. So we can hope, I can hope personally, that this idea will, how to say, will be materialized in the future worldwide more in a practical way.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you to Igor in spirit. Let's move on. Our next speaker is Francisco Martinez. Francisco is an anthropologist and associate professor at the School of Humanities of Tallinn University. Francisco has published several books, including Remains of the Soviet Past in Estonia, Repair Brokenness Breakthrough, Politics of Recuperation in Post-Crisis Portugal, as well as a forthcoming one, I guess, Peripheral Methodologies. And likewise, he has curated several exhibitions and will speak about one of those today, as far as I understand. The title of Francisco's contribution perhaps has changed by now, so I'll leave it to him. Francisco, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks first of all to Lienia and to Magda for organizing this inspiring event. I'm going to present some of the thoughts or ideas that I am writing for the chapter that I promise for the book that is coming out from this event, out of this event. Do you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Nice.
Good. Yeah.
So after thanking Lienia and Magda and introducing this presentation as a work in progress, I want to contest this idea of haunting and propose a more epistemological progressive approach towards post-socialist materiality. There is this beautiful provocative quote by David Kiedekel in his work about Romania. The post-socialist study is not a happy genre. And this idea of haunting reproduces this approach, which has been predominant while approaching the changes occurring in the last 30 years in what we understand as Eastern Europe. And it is also evident in the work of Igor, who was just talking before me. I was glad to visit his pavilion, the Croatian pavilion, his work in Venice, and also bought his book. And I am also glad now to collaborate with him somehow. But my point here is that there has been too much emphasis on what socialism has done to us, and on trauma discourses, which are of course important, but this strong focus has eclipsed the other side of the discussion, which is what we have done to pass things, to the inherited, and how socialist legacies endure in the global present. In a way, so my presentation is an invitation to think about post-Soviet future, if you wish, and to apply more epistemologically progressive methodologies. Also often, and I am talking from my own field experience in Estonia, the decline or vanishing of Soviet materiality has been understood as a post-mortem act of justice, somehow demonstrating the failure of socialism as an ideology. And again, I am inviting you with these ideas to move forward, to step beyond this dichotomy and think about these Soviet legacies in a more relational way, relational in the sense of, in the temporal sense and in the scalar sense, like in different scales, and in relation to multiple regions, and not simply what is called Eastern Europe. To be honest, and this is my personal, of course, taste, but I am a bit tired of readings of post-socialism that approaches as nostalgic. That's why I thought as an interesting and provocative to twist the focus towards the future and put myself in the position of an archaeologist of post-socialism, for instance, thinking what would be left from post-socialist materialities. I mean, these things that were constructed after 91, 50 years ahead, for instance, and also to think about something conceptual approach, like something like a post-brokenness, in the sense of what goes on in a region like qualified as in decline, as the one I am studying these days, like Ida-Virumaa, Eastern Estonia, and also like engaging from this concept proposed by Michal of transsocialism, which I will introduce a bit later. But one of the limitations of my work, like that I faced in the last 10 years, like working in Eastern Europe, is that the things I was studying vanished like too quickly, like showing a temporal edge. Indeed, like among different scholars, one of the key features of post-socialism has been described as the impermanence of the object of study, very likely to disappear. Also, what remains has been lasting over different throughout different generations and political regimes, giving to these Soviet legacies a melancholic touch, which can be compared to the post-industrial, but I believe is more eschatological or forensic. And again, like Igor has been showing this very nicely in his work, this kind of eschatological forensic touch of post-Soviet ruins and post-Soviet legacies. That's why in my approach, in my study of changes in Estonia, social, I mean the way cultural and social changes in Estonia materialize, it helped me understand the changes to observe how Soviet legacies have been reduced to zero value, to waste, and that again added the difficulty of observing, describing, studying ethnographically these things, like buildings, for instance, or places in the making that were demolished quite often. And an inspiring author, an inspiring paper describing this was the one by Melissa Caldwell about newness and loss in Moscow, like published like 15, 16 years ago. Describing the temporal complexity of post-socialism as an object of study, and not simply because of this dichotomy of expectations and revenge or kind of victimism in relation to the past, but also because of this idea of constant endings and beginnings and raptors that were interacting between themselves, not simply happening as a succession of ruptures and radical changes, but they were interacting between them, generating a very complex network of temporalities. So in order to understand this, we had to acknowledge the importance of the pace of the changes, but also the non-progressive character of some of these changes. And in the previous session, there was a very interesting presentation about changing, like current changes, social changes in Poland, in juxtaposed with what was going on in the 80s. And in my view, we helped to show this non-progressive character of changes. In some cases, like suddenly stopping this progressive charge, or even like going backwards. As a consequence, like participant observation or like traditional ethnographic research may not be enough to observe and understand what's going on in these societies. And we have to accordingly engage in methodological experiments, sometimes edgy, sometimes peripheral, and the non-formalized or emerging character of these societies, like having in mind Eastern Europe, but also of the institutions where we have been working, like with limited tradition in anthropology, for instance, made possible this or facilitate these experiments, and also facilitated like the creation of alliances between people of different backgrounds. So in my work, for instance, and I'm going to present some of these examples, I have curated exhibitions as part of my methodology, engaged in contemporary archaeology, as well as created inventories of urban halls in Tbilisi, or of transsocialist connectors in Narva. And during my ethnography or fieldwork, local artists and curators often prove to be knowledge makers themselves, not simply knowledge holders from which we have to extract data. So they were like observers and also conceptualizers, creating analytical knowledge, in some cases through aesthetic forms, but also through verbal descriptions and narrative, in the form of narrative diaries, for instance. And that made me think that, take like exhibitions as contact zones, while changes were being materialized even before they happen in society. but also approaching artworks as analytical artifacts. And this is indeed not what I am proposing. Is not initiated by me, or is not extremely original. It has been done already by some of my colleagues like Adolfo Estalella and Tomás Criado, but also proposed before by Douglas Holm and George Marcus, like exploring new forms of collaboration in the field, and acknowledging that the relationship with our subjects is changing due to different factors, like for instance, the multiplication of information available. Our informants are highly educated professionals, even if not having an anthropological background. As I mentioned, they are able to produce analytical knowledge throughout different registers. And that has made me think that these days in contemporary anthropology, the most interesting stuff is being done actually by non-anthropologists, or by anthropologists working out of academia, or by anthropologists working at the edge of institutional affiliations. So the challenge here is to integrate into analytical academic work in the form of books or in the form of papers the analysis done by artists or by curators or by designers. There is also this interesting project initiated by Nikolai Sorin-Chaikov about ethnographic conceptualism, approaching exhibitions as contact zones, whereby cultural forms are being both like constructed and reflected. So in a way, we are studying also the reactions that we are provoking with our ethnographic devices, in the case of Nikolai, through exhibitions. So exhibitions stop being simply a displays of already finished like knowledge or findings, but it's also a way of displaying knowledge in the making and creating new relationships in the field while doing research, not after or beforehand. And I reflected on all this in a book that is being published in November by UCL Press, based on one of the exhibitions that I curated. Here you can see the cover. And before I applied this approach in a more explorative way in Georgia, this is at Tbilisi, in the Akhmasenebeli neighborhood, and it shows the way the municipality of Tbilisi engages in repair work, like as an absolute project that changes the life of people. People cannot avoid being affected by repair works. So after being there for 10 months in Tbilisi, I established like working relationships with different artists and proposed them to help me to understand and to create analytical knowledge about how people are affected by repair practices. At the same time that we reflected on the existing tradition of repair craftsmanship in Georgian culture. I don't have much time to go into detail, but I will just show you a couple of examples and illustrations about repair practices in Tbilisi. And I want to put the emphasis on this work by Group Bouillon, a performance they did in an exhibition that curator Marika Agu and myself curated in the Tartu Art Museum of Estonia, called Aesthetics of Repair in Georgia. And Group Bouillon here went through a ritual of self-repair, liberating themselves from like negative energy by shaving each other's head. One of the things that we discovered is that repair in Tbilisi is a state of permanent unfinishedness and approximation, like based on forays of improvement that have generated a sort of haltura, which is a Russian term used in Georgian, of repair practices. Also, like relying on the work of Nikolai Sorin-Chaikov, I understood that repair is a way of keeping people busy and preventing them from engaging in in long-lasting political changes. Also, another artistic collaboration I had with local artists and curators was creating an inventory of halls in Tbilisi. So we created a typology of 15 different halls, found in the city, and discuss about the politics that we can read in these halls. The main conclusion, and again to keep it short, because I want to give different examples of this, is that the halls is a mediator between people, and also it establishes particular ways of communicating, of connecting people with the state. Here, some examples of the halls of our typology. Part of my work has been also focusing on repair practices in a comparative way, juxtaposing repair and reading the politics of repair in 4 different locations: in Georgia, which I already mentioned, but also in Estonia, in Berlin, and in Lisbon. I will now introduce what I learned in Estonia, but the trigger of my interest in repair appeared after reading this chapter by Catherine Alexander, in which she proposed to study repair as a barometer of social transformations. And in her view, the interest of the specificity or interest of repair is not that it happens, is the moral, political, and aesthetic implications of it. I mean, we are not, an object is not valuable per se, but because we mobilize emotional and economic and technological resources to repair it. And these resources mobilized have, on the one hand, moral implications, but they also are informative of the changes happening and the way local culture is materialized. In my fieldwork in Estonia, one of the things that I learned is to take repair practices as a way of learning about the Soviet past. As I mentioned, anything that was Soviet, from more monumental and memorial build forms to more quotidian and everyday artifacts, they all were reduced to waste, to zero value, discarded as a way of contra-reaction that is very much implicated in the post prefix. What I discovered, however, is that repair practices were helping those engaged in repair practices, but also, or especially younger generations, in rediscovering and learning about the Soviet past in a less politicized way. So it was a way of reassessing the Soviet past, the novo, in a less, if you wish, toxic way. And by doing that, it transformed the conditions of gaining knowledge about the past, having both empirical and analytical relevance, and therefore an epistemic consequence. And this notion of being reduced to zero value, it happened from the demolition of buildings, like the one you are seeing here, to a practice that I describe as architectural taxidermy, that consisted in emptying out buildings, like this one, like the central post office constructed in the 80s for the Moscow Olympic Games, that had some events organized in Tallinn. This is how it looks like nowadays. It was transformed into a shopping mall, like this one that is has been emptied out, is the Krenholm factory, in which over 10,000 people were working in Narva, and also it happened in the Railway Street Market that was transformed into another shopping mall. but as well as with people like presented as obsolete, not simply their skills, the skills of these people that were valuable under the Soviet regime, and then reduced or presented as redundant and obsolete in the post-Soviet regime. And an example of this is Lyuba, here on the picture, who was unemployed for several years, and like 20 years ago, he was invited by some archaeologists that were about to create the printing museum to teach them how to use these typesetting machines. And then, like for a while, Lyuba became very popular among youngsters who were interested in learning these skills, but also in using them in creating posters, for instance, for clubs, for parties, for artistic events, etc. One of the methodological experiments I carried was to exhibit objects from the Railway Street Museum in Tallinn before it disappeared, before it was transformed into a shopping mall. Like on the one hand, showing the relevance of this market for those going there to buy and to sell, because it was kind of a meeting point for elderly people and for marginals who only speak Russian and could not access to a proper job, and like elderly people who live in the periphery of Tallinn, and also to do a kind of archaeology of this place that has been nowadays transformed into this. And accordingly, I invited like a representative of the vendors, a representative of the city hall, a representative of the real estate company that bought the site, and they were forced to disclose the plans because there were different rumors about what's going to happen. And then finally they were forced in this event for the finishers of the exhibition to create like a public acknowledgement of their plans and also of the relevance of the place. Another challenge for our work or in the study of post-socialism has been the way the concept itself has been mutating over the last 30 years. It started as a way of criticizing or questioning the paradigm of transition predominant in Eastern Europe in the 90s. I remember that post-socialism was a concept created in Western universities and then later applied to Eastern European societies. And then it evolved into a more ethnographic tool to describe the institutional unmaking happening in late 90s and also the changes experienced in the everyday life of people. And in the last decade has been more like used as part of a global condition, in a way traveling to other regions and then coming back to Eastern Europe and creating interesting connections between localities, not simply in Eastern Europe, but also beyond, which brings the explanatory limits of a narrow understanding of post-socialism as a concept, strictly constrained to a single period, let's say the 90s or what came after the collapse of the Soviet Union, or to an area, or to a region like Eastern Europe. So I like to think like post-socialism as a plastic concept that has explanatory limits, but also has the potential to be used in other regions and then come back to Eastern Europe and connect what's going on, what's happening here in this region. I'm talking from Tallinn, from Estonia, in relation to other localities and in relation to global changes. That's why I was inspired by this concept proposed by Michal of transsocialism to account for new relational topologies and observe the elements of Soviet legacies or post-socialist materialities in relation to global governmentality. And Michal has applied this in two of his works, at least I am aware of. His book on the Stalinist skyscraper in Warsaw, and also the one about recentering recentering the city, if I'm correct, that he edited with Jonathan Bach. And the idea of the prefix of the trans in contraposition to the post, the prefix of the post, help us to understand the process of mutating, of going through the changes and taking Soviet legacies not as a fixed that has been reduced to zero value, but as something that still has functionality, but perhaps different than the one for which it was originally designed, or that has like been transformed into something else, or that is still in use, creating complex afterlives, not simply like one-dimensional interpretations. And that puts the emphasis on what things on what things have become instead of how things essentially were or are. And I have used this notion of transsocialism in an inventory of connectors in the city of Narva on the border between Russia and Estonia, which means on the border between the European Union and Russia, on the border between NATO and Russia. For instance, like studying infrastructures, energy infrastructures, like this one on the very border, like with gas and oil, as well as energy grids of this like energy hydro plant producing electricity that is shared, that is on the very border. The Narva River that you see there is on the very border between both countries. And also how these forms travel, but in a rather complex way. You can see here like this sticker like commemorating those who fall in the Second World War, which was created like 15 years ago by the Kremlin. And nowadays you can see it on the cars of Narva, but also like complex compositions, like on this window that has become a showcase. And it's able to combine like Yuri Gagarin, the Tsars, Putin, Stalin, and whatnot, like Orthodox religion, all that. Or this one on a corner, on the corner of the Narva Castle, like European, showing the European flag because of a repair project with the statue of monument of Lenin that has been cornered there. They have been brave enough as to top it down. So it's still standing there, kind of hidden. On the left, you can see the newly renovated promenade with European money, and it shows the name and year of accession of all the members of European Union, including like Sur Britannia, like Great Britain, there on the bottom, which delivers the message. It creates kind of performative experience of the border, like a pleasant one, delivering the message that here starts the European Union, and this is like much more materially improved than the other side of the border. You cannot see it, but there is a beautiful promenade like throughout this site that you can see. Or like different repair projects of buildings, like paid by European money. This is paid by the Credex project, renovating Hrušovkas in the city as a way of improving the material conditions of people. I am running out of time, so I will try to speed up. There is another inspiring paper by Michal that shows the surprising persistence of Soviet infrastructures and contests this dichotomy or this kind of negative label of applied to socialist modernist architecture as being failed. That perhaps he will disclose later, as I don't have time now. But I will present, like, to end my paper, like my current ongoing research. One is, which is still unpublished. This has been written in the form of a paper and currently under review, and it focuses on the city of Cogna-Nome, which is a former mining town that has lost like 1/3 of its population. I mean, the whole region of Kohtla-Järve went from 200,000 inhabitants to 130,000 inhabitants, so 70,000 people moved away in the last 30 years. and it's partly because of the industries closing down, because of environmental pollution, as well as because of political abandonment of they came after the Soviet collapse, lack of investments and lack of care and attention, if you wish, because of being an area predominantly inhabited by Russian-speaking people, so-called occupants. And so nowadays there is a pilot project to demolish like half-empty apartment buildings, all of them like Khrushchevkas, and then relocating the people into some of these apartment houses. So they are kind of putting together people while demolishing some of these houses left behind. Interestingly, the demolition of buildings is being appreciated as a form of care by the Estonian state. So the fact that the Estonian state is mobilizing resources to demolish this building and relocate the neighbors is being appreciated by the municipality as the help that they never had in the last 30 years. And it's of course like encountering a lot of resistances and suspicion by the local neighbors, even like calling the representative of the Estonian Ministry of Finances as representative of Stalin, that they were like trying to move like people massively as Stalin did in the 30s. So there are these kind of complex connotations, obviously unfair ones, that create tensions. And in some of these meetings, the representative of the Ministry of Finances was introducing the plan and presenting the benefits of it, and saying that this plan is done for the interest of the state, and there is nothing bad behind it. There is no hidden agenda. While the locals were asking, like, why don't you give us the money? We can move away to Finland to work as we want. We just want the money. Or why don't you think about our interests, only about the interests of the state? So there were like complex tensions that refer back to post-socialist abandonment, as well as the relation between people and citizens in the Soviet time. These are some of the apartments that are being given to the neighbors relocated. These photos that I have gathered with my research companion, Katie Cleavin. The last example of my talk is that I'm starting to move on from this repair approach to one that puts the focus on post-brokenness. In other words, what goes on in a condition of decline or brokenness that is still ongoing, in the sense that the decline of these areas and the brokenness of some of these infrastructures, it doesn't mean that they stop working or that there is nothing going on there. Quite the opposite. There are many new infrastructures created based on the old broken ones, and there are new social bonds created based, like, in despite of being in decline, and in despite of considering this locality as hopeless by locals. Still they have to create new networks and new infrastructures on their own. And in 3 weeks I'm opening an exhibition. I had another example here. I have no time to go on, perhaps later. So I am opening an exhibition in 3 weeks called Life in Decline, precisely studying the way local people there in Ida Virma are answering to this condition of vulnerability. For that, I have invited 10 Estonian artists to create a new work reflecting on this matter, and it's still work in progress. This is the banner like promoting the exhibition. And these are some of the things that we are working with as we are intervening in the former administrative building of the Kogla mine, a mine that is 100 years old, and that it has been closed down, I think, already for 20 years, but still the former administrative building was left as it is part of the Estonian Mining Museum. So artists are creating site-specific artworks, engaging with the materiality left in the area. As I mentioned, this is work in progress. These are some of the works that are being created. And I welcome you to come to Eastern Estonia in the summer and visit the exhibition. If you do so, please contact me. I will be glad to do a guided tour to you if possible and present the results of this research. And one of the interesting moves here is that the artists themselves are working with me as accidental ethnographers. So they are producing anthropological knowledge with me in an open-ended way. So this is my presentation. I have more material, but I think it's enough. I give the floor now to Michal.
Thanks very much, Francisco. Really, thank you for that. And let's move on. Our final speaker on this panel today is Michal Murawski. Michal is an anthropologist and lecturer in critical area studies at the School of Slavonic and East European Studies at University College London. And he's the author of The Palace Complex, a Stalinist skyscraper, capitalist Warsaw and a city transfixed, and numerous other publications. Michal's written on the social lives of monumental buildings, on the architecture and planning of East European communism, and has also co-curated an exhibition at the State Shusev Museum of Architecture in Moscow, which he might be speaking about today. But Michal, I'll stop there. The floor is yours.
Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out how to share the right screen. Because now
it's looking like it's happening.
Oh, really? Okay.
You were doing something right, because I was seeing myself double, which means you were starting to share your screen.
Oh, I could find it. Okay, now
try that again.
Okay, now I can find.
Yeah, this is good.
So let's see if I can make it full screen. Does that work?
It's not yet full screen. So it's okay. This is good. Yeah, full screen. Good.
That's great. So Teams is okay after all. So thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to present, and thank you, Igor, and also to Fran for, especially for Fran's kind of expansive presentation, which it was nice to see also referred to these ideas of still socialism and trans socialism that I'm not going to talk at length about them today, because actually, I mean, I can't keep up with Francisco's incredibly prolific output, and so by the time I kind of mentioned this idea in a text in passing, Fran had already published an entire paper about it. So he's actually kind of coined this term, or he's sort of theorized this term more extensively than I have, but I'm trying to make sense of it now also in some upcoming publications. And working on this text and working on a couple of other texts in recent days, I realized that actually this idea of trans socialism has already been used. I thought it hadn't, because I'd kind of Googled it in inverted commas before and I wasn't able to find it. But this time I did find it in a text by Göran Thörnblom, the kind of this Swedish post-Marxist from 2008, where he refers to trans socialism as an alternative to post-socialism, but he doesn't refer to it in this kind of intersectional sense that I think both me and Francisco are trying in a more kind of in a broader and in a more kind of unruly, undisciplined sense that we're trying to invoke. So it's a kind of concept in progress. So I want to just also, I was kind of terrified by the theme of this symposium and of this entire undertaking, because this notion of communist specters haunting our present is very much, I mean, it's kind of at the center of my work, and I didn't really know what to choose and what to talk about. So I kind of and I have a couple of papers that I've presented before which engage more explicitly with this idea of haunting, but I've chosen to not repeat those and instead to show some slides, to show some illustrations from an exhibition that I curated in Moscow and from my Moscow research, which I mean, the Soviet or the context of socialist Moscow was there in the Moscow project, but it's very much a project, as opposed to my Warsaw book, which was about a Stalinist skyscraper, which was much more explicitly about the presence of the socialist past in the capitalist present. The Moscow project is about something that happened after, about an architectural complex that was created entirely after the Soviet Union fell, a piece of contemporary architecture. So I thought that perhaps, I mean, semi-consciously, it would be a kind of hard test case to see how much of the socialist or the Soviet past still continues to haunt this thing that is entirely un-Soviet or non-Soviet. So it's kind of, I mean, it's obviously findable, but it's more kind of obtusely findable. So the context of this exhibition was, this is a show, I was doing a project that was funded by the Leverhulme Trust for a few years in Moscow, and it's a research project about blagoustroystva, about this transformation of urban space in Moscow. Oh, sugar, did I just on full screen? Because I'm trying to, can you see my screen, the sharing screen now?
Yes, it's fine.
Right. Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Because it told me that sharing is paused on Teams.
No.
Where's your share?
I'm seeing.
Okay, good. In the full screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so false alarm. This is a project about the transformation of public space in Moscow under the current mayor, Sergei Sobyanin, who's been kind of trying to eradicate the traces of some of the Soviet traces, but in particular the traces of the wild capitalist kind of period of kitsch and excess and chaos under the previous mayor, Yuri Lushkov, who reigned over Moscow for 20 years. And now there's this kind of process of authoritarian kind of quasi-pseudo-ecological greenwashing, authoritarian modernization that's occurring in Moscow. And the highlight, the kind of flagship incarnation of this project of kind of authoritarian greenwashing is Park Zaryadye, a new park that was opened next to the Kremlin by Vladimir Putin in September 2017, which is designed by the same people who designed the High Line in Manhattan and various other similar kind of projects, clones of the High Line all over the world now. With the High Line being this kind of bullet of kind of eco-gentrification running through Manhattan. And Zaryadye is kind of an attempt to replicate that in Moscow. So we set up this kind of fake research institute called the Institute Zaryadiology, the Institute of Zaryadiology, and we held an exhibition. Actually, I wanted to show this invite to our exhibition, which had the logos of the Institute Zaryadiology next to the logo of the Ministry of Culture of the Russian Federation, which accepted our kind of existence as a bona fide entity, and we were able to we founded this kind of research institute with this fake research institute with students at the Moscow Higher School of Economics who I was working with, and with staff members there too, and we carried out research. We presented our research over a series of round tables and walking tours, etc., held in various places in Moscow. And then we invited artists to come to some of these round tables and to submit proposals for artworks responding to the themes of our exhibition. And then we somehow convinced the Moscow State Museum of Architecture to put on the exhibition. And it was open in July 2018. And just the brief context of Zaryadye, these are just images from this kind of pamphlet catalogue of the exhibition that we printed out and distributed there. This is on the left, you can see the history of how Zaryadye looked before in the 1930s, before it was demolished, in order to make way for various grand projects, including the Commissariat for Heavy Industry, which was to be built on the site, with famous entries for this commissariat submitted by Viesnin brothers and Mielnikov and others. Then a tall Stalinist skyscraper was called the Zaryadia Administrative Building, was almost built on the site. Construction was commenced, but it was never completed because it started too late and Stalin died. And the lower stories and the foundations of this skyscraper were converted by its very same architect, Dmitry Chichulin, into the Hotel Rossiya, Gostinca Rossiya, which was a kind of Khrushchev, Brezhnev bling, a kind of luxury late socialist hotel complex designed by the same architect who had designed the tower that was supposed to be on this site. The Hotel Rossiya was demolished in 2006, and Norman Foster wanted to build this kind of luxury multi-use complex on the site. That never happened. The site stood empty and derelict, and it was this kind of Tarkovskian disaster zone until in 2012, Vladimir Putin visited the site together with Sergei Sobyanin. You can see Putin's visit here in one of the slides, and it was a spontaneous walk, a kind of a quasi-spontaneous walk that they had on the site, and Putin said to Sobyanin, Sobyanin suggested that they should build an administrative center on the site of Zaryadia for bureaucrats and for politicians, and Putin, who was then prime minister, said, well, you know, I just had an idea, we should build a park here instead for the people of Moscow. Isn't this a good idea, Sergei Semyonovich? And Sergei Semyonovich said, yes, you are. It's a great idea. It's a fantastic idea. Let's do it. And so that was this kind of spontaneous gifting by the sovereign of the park to the people of Moscow. And then Dulevskoye Renfrew won a competition, which they had been arranged in advance to win. And then the park finally opened in September 2017. So, I mean, I won't go through all of these slides, but I'll mention some of the works very briefly that were created for the exhibition, and some of the ways in which they dealt with aspects of a Soviet or a communist past that maybe was present in Zaryadia. I know I don't have much time, so I'll talk about fewer of the works that I meant to talk about. This is a painting by Ariadne Arendt, which was being completed actually at the time of the completion of Zaryadia in Montenegro, and Ariadne wasn't thinking about Zaryadia while she was making this painting, but by chance she painted. So this painting is a kind of art history of Moscow actionism, a kind of perverted canon of Moscow actionism. She collects all of the Moscow actionists from the 80s until the 2010s on Red Square and puts them together. And it just so happens that by chance, in the corner of the painting, in the site that is actually occupied by Zaryadia, she painted this kind of birch and pine forest, which resembles the Russian landscape typologies which have been gathered in Zaryadia. And she placed Mavramati hanging from his cross, and Oleg Kulik copulating with a dog on the site of this forest. And she had to convert this painting into a GIF, because it was in Montenegro, and Marat Gelman didn't want to send it to Russia, but also because in order for it not to violate the obscenity laws in Russia. And then the director only agreed to have this, even the animated GIF, on show if it was placed inside this kind of Kaaba-like black box with 18+ written all over the side, which of course increased the air of kind of transgression associated with viewing this piece. But I mean, there's a few things that could be said about the Soviet past there. But yeah, I mean, one of the works I wanted to talk about was this film by Igor Isayev. We took several trips to the workers' settlement, which was following the park's opening. There was a kind of a gorodok for the workers who were carrying out various work, completing the construction of the park and also the construction of the Philharmonic a concert hall which was being built on the site too, and they lived in this kind of slum-like Gorodok behind these false facade proclaiming illustrated with kind of glorious renderings of the park of the future, and these workers lived on the other side of the false facade, and we visited them quite a few times, and one of our visits was together with a filmmaker, Igor, actually several of our visits, and he made a film on the basis of these visits which we showed at the show, and there are interesting conversations with the builders of Zariadia represented in this film. The workers had a kind of mixed relationship to the park itself. They thought that they were not treated as badly as workers on some other construction sites. These were, of course, the majority of these workers were Gastarbeiter, were immigrants from Central Asia and from the Russian regions and from other post-Soviet republics. So they had an idea that they were treated less badly on the site of Zariadia than in some other places, but they were still not treated particularly well. And one worker told us that this is the most important part of Zariadia because this is where you can see the shit in which that we should take our students from the High School of Economics to the Gorodok, so that they can see что любое здание в России рождается из дерьма, в котором живут строители. That every building in Russia is born from the shit in which the workers live in. They also referred. One of our visits was on the anniversary of the Russian Revolution, the centenary of the October Revolution, in whatever it was, 7th of November or 9th of November 2017, and there was a lot of references to the revolution then, and kind of this revolutionary spirit of rebellion was kind of triggered, was discussed by some of the workers. So they used the specter of revolution in order to theorize their own situation vis-a-vis the park. Isadori Nogore dance collective also made a fantastic work returning this grandiose gift of the sovereign, this kind of Stalin-esque gift of the sovereign to the sovereign via a series of performances. Here also parodying the language of kind of Sobyanin era contemporary Russian officialdom, which is still so very much indebted to the language of Soviet era officialdom. This vernacular, the speech of Sergei Semyonovich Sobyanin and Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, and all these formulations are extremely their reliance in the past is parodied in the text that the soundtrack that Isadori Nogore recorded to accompany their performances, and this is why I was particularly interested in the book in the Lenin speech book that Esther Leslie mentioned during her presentation. And then, I mean, there's many interesting works here that I won't go into. Hanna Zubkova made an interesting. I actually can't see the clock, so I don't know how much time I have left unless I exit the presentation. 1:15.
It's 1:15, yes.
Okay, fine. So I'll try and finish in about 5 minutes. Have I just unfull screened my presentation?
That's right. You have unfull screened.
If that's a verb. Okay, I'll re-full screen, but then I won't be able to see the clock.
That works.
So yeah, Hanna Zubkova's work is she took a red curtain from a brothel in Amsterdam, a closed-down brothel that had been closed as part of the Dutch government's or the Amsterdam municipality's clearance of the red light district over the course of the last year in preparation for its transformation into 1012, which is this new kind of district of de la Scofidio designed parks and lofts and apartment blocks, which is to replace the former red light district of Amsterdam, which was judged to be no longer acceptable in Amsterdam. And she exhibited in our show by virtue of a comparison to the demolition of the Chateau Rassia, which was also justified by Lushkov by recourse to the moral dirt Russia. So the Rushkov and other politicians at the time said that the Russia had to be demolished, not so much because of its architecture or because of its aesthetic state or because of its construction and quality or anything, but because it was full of sex workers. It was full of people who were morally out of place in the new Moscow of today. So Zubkova was making this connection between pointing out that this kind of moralizing justification for ruination and for the transformation of space is definitely a fixture of Russia, but it's part of this kind of purificatory, paradisiacal tendency that's in a way global these days. This is a fantastic work that I won't go into. Putin v każdej plitkie. Yeah, I mean, I'll just finish that with some of a few kind of awkward moments from the exhibition. Some of the construction workers from Zariadia came to the exhibition opening, and I tried to introduce them to the various kind of left-wing curators who were assembled there, and it didn't always go very well. And at the end of the show, we saw that at the end of the vernissage, we saw that the USB stick containing the movie had been taken from the screen, had been taken from out of the TV. And there's no indication that any of the construction workers themselves took it. And they sent text messages afterwards saying they had a great time, etc. They were even quoted in Art Forum as having had a great time. But what was interesting was the reaction of some of the museum staff and some of my other colleagues in Moscow who were kind of convinced that it was indeed the workers who had taken the USB stick. And there was also a very interesting scene with regard to this gift giving and the kind of legacy of this kind of Soviet tradition of grandiose gift giving in space, and the invasion of the opening by a community of Furshetniki in Moscow. So in Moscow, there are self-organized communities of mostly impoverished elderly members or middle-aged members of the intelligentsia who scour Facebook and other social media for news of open exhibition openings that you don't have to register for in advance. And we didn't require registration, and many of them came. So many of the Furshetniki descended en masse upon the opening of the Poltava Zariadia show, and it was I mean, it was an artwork in itself, and it was a spectacular kind of performance. They cleansed the reception area within minutes of arrival, and again, this was a kind of this was a chaotic scene, and one which was reflected on. There was an anger among the museum employees and some of the other people on the exhibition side that we had not taken steps to control to prevent this descent of Furshetniki upon the exhibition, and that somehow the gift of the wine and the snacks that were provided actually by the Polish embassy at the opening was not for these Furshetniki, was not for these people who presumably by virtue of their relative impoverishment, their inability to live in a city whose center was no longer for them, were resorting to these kinds of tactics in order to socialize and in order to retain a collectivity. I won't go into this album that was issued by Sobyanin, where he compares himself to Stalin and compares the 2008, well, his Blagoustroystvo project to the 1935 general plan for reconstruction of Moscow. But I wanted to just show one clip referring to the extremely popular use of a phrase, "Bytye определяет сознание," being determines consciousness, which is a quotation from the contribution to the critique of political economy by Karl Marx. And this is a phrase that I noticed was used very often, not necessarily purely by architects, by so-called ordinary people, by taxi drivers, by many of my interlocutors, with reference to the reconstruction of public space in Moscow. And this clip is actually, I don't know if I'm sharing sound, so I'm not, hopefully it will work. Let's see. This is actually from an interview that I foolishly did with RT just following my return from fieldwork in Moscow. And this is how the presenter introduces the context of Blagoustroystvo.
Plonu, welcome to worlds apart. Karl Marx famously claimed that it's the being that determines consciousness rather than vice versa, a maxim that some Russian city planners have recently taken to heart with a much greater eagerness than their Soviet predecessors. As the wave of urban makeovers moves across the country, will the change in the way the Russians live affect how they think?
Did you hear that? Yeah, so it's this extraordinary use of this phrase in all sorts of different contexts by politicians, by journalists, by people you encounter in all sorts of walks of everyday life. And I posted this video, and lots of people posted other examples. And one of my acquaintances from Kiev wrote this comment saying, "Yeah, we Slavs love this quotation." And it's this this survival of this phrase from from the Marxist-Leninist, what Anna Kruglova calls the Marxist-Leninist everyday vernacular speech in Russia. That's something I wanted to highlight as one side of. I mean, this is also a type of trans-socialism, or a type of what Liv Utselsea and Joanna Druta call a zombie socialism, or what I've referred to as still socialism. But it's of perhaps a different kind to the kind of more seditious use of Marxist tropes and Marxist-Leninist tropes in particular by the builders of Zaryadye. So, I mean, this is the doubleness, or this is not to construct a binary distinction between a kind of a good trans-socialism and a bad trans-socialism, but there's certainly a complex spectrum of different types of trans-socialisms that exist, and an extraordinary kind of situation whereby these types of Marxist vernaculars and practices and aesthetics and smells and aesthetics merge with emergent forms of governance and of exploitation, and somehow are still Marxist, but also entirely un-Marxist at the same time. So this was just to highlight this kind of Communist Hauntings has many different incarnations, and it's an interesting project to try to catalogue and make sense of those incarnations. And it's a project that I suppose I'm only just beginning. And hopefully we can all, it'll continue forever. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Michal. We've taken our time, but I think we've all enjoyed your presentations, hearing about your sort of anthropological and artistic encounters and crisscrossing. So thank you for that. We formally have 5 minutes left on the panel. We can take a bit longer if there are questions from the audience. So do please write in the chat or try to just switch on your microphone if you want to ask a question. Perhaps while people are thinking through. Yeah, Francisco?
Yeah, I may have a couple of quick questions to Michal, like to provoke him.
Sure, go ahead.
Partly related to my presentation. The first one is, Michal, how a future archaeologist will study Zaryadye Park? I mean, what will be left and how will it be interpreted some decades ahead, you think? That's the first question. And the second question is, was there any moment in your research of the skyscraper in Warsaw, was there any moment during the fieldwork when you felt that you had to speed up the research, perhaps in this process in which you decided to organize, I remember, some workshops or roundtables, or I mean, all this, like to make the connection with my idea of vanishing object of study, like postsocialism and its materiality, like quickly disappearing. Like, did you had that feeling in your own research of that in Warsaw? Thank you.
Should we maybe take, thanks, Fran. Should we maybe take the question from Magda as well, or the comment?
Sure, let's do that. Magda, yeah. Can you join us? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I just do it without camera now. Oh, no. Thank you so much for these rich presentations, and I can't keep up with any of your speed, and also for kind of pointing towards this discomfort you felt with the idea of hauntings, which in relation to your kind of the idea of trans-socialism, or this kind of trans-temporality, and linking it to the first to the first panel as well, is something I realized that we might have to really think the haunting not in this kind of traditional way of strictly following one event in the past and then haunting a moment in the present, but as something much more wild and chaotic, or like not like transcending traditional ideas of times and coming from various directions at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Picking up material relics, but also imaginary images and associations. So, and I think that this kind of trance element helps in kind of expanding the haunting towards away from its traditional kind of maybe, simplified view. But I have a question regarding to Francisco and the idea of repair. Thank you for pointing out the kind of the difficulty of living in destroyed environments and in holes, like if holes remain open. I think like I tended to idealizing it a bit, to kind of wanting to remain within the hole, acknowledging it, that it's there, and like how important it is to repair and to kind of show this gesture of care and bring it to life in some way. I wanted to make though the link to a different form of repair that Igor mentioned, where he spoke about the destroyed or burdened or broken relationship between father and son, the trauma that the father experienced, and how it was repaired, not by kind of filling the hole and creating a new landscape, but by exactly kind of this destructive creative gesture of setting something on fire, which is a very different form of repair. And just wanted to make this connection, ask what you think.
Can I go first, because I have to leave quite soon, in a few minutes for another meeting? Is that okay? I just wanted to say that those are really good questions, and the question about the father and son is particularly apposite for this all-male panel, probably. But with regards to Fran, what was the first part of your question? Because I had to answer.
Archaeology of Zadiac.
So one of the members of the Institute of Zadiadiology actually prepared this small text on this theme, where he basically imagines Zadiadia Park turning into a kind of the re-Lushkovization of Zadiadia Park. So this project of authoritarian modernization failing, and Zadiadia slowly being taken over by statues, to Forostovsky or to Sergei Shoigu or whatever, and kind of small kiosks and shopping malls, and this kind of dilapidation of this vision of kind of top-down greenwashing, and a kind of re-entrance of Moscow's kind of wild capitalist as opposed to wild urbanism into Zadiadia. So that's a vision for the future that was predicted by one of the students. But I don't know. I suppose what the archaeologist approach will have to depend on will have to be grounded, right? It will have to depend on what's there. But there is, the park director told me that the park there's a lot of pressure on the park administration constantly to carry out this re-Lushkovization, that institutions, organizations, many of them with inside connections and support, keep suggesting various statues and monuments and kind of little playgrounds, etc., that are to be placed in the park. So I very much hope that they aren't able to resist the pressure for much longer, and that this happens, because it will be an interesting thing ethnographically to observe.
Yes, I will now. Thanks, Michal. My interest in repair is based on three aspects. The first one is the practical repair as a practice of socio-material stability or stabilization in a context of constant change, of ruptures, of liminality. The second one is the symbolic, in the sense of healing and recognizing, because not everything is reparable. There are many things with no possible repair, as well as there are things that are broken and continue working. And the third one is epistemic, repair as a way of learning, especially for new generations, learning how things were and how material things embody certain ideas that has been discarded. In this sense, like new futures. And about the second question, also by you, Magda, the bound is also a place to live. So that's why I'm interested in this sense of post-brokenness, how things continue going on in places that have been affected by mining, by pollution, by the industrialization. And I have this idea, the bound, the whole is still a place to live. Many people still live there and try to have a normal everyday life. And all this to say that it is beautiful, and there is a lot of learning in studying how things perdure, how things last in time. Indeed, like many Soviet infrastructures and Soviet like materiality is beautiful not because of how they were designed or the ideas that they embodied, but because they have lasted in time throughout so many different changes. And this practice of enduring is there is a lot of learning in studying, like through repair, through brokenness, through the functionality of a still socialist infrastructure, whatever. But how these things are enduring is fruitful, and it has not been studied enough because most of the focus goes to what the past has done to us, how we have been affected by socialism, the past as a burden. And this goes against, in a way, of complementing the psychoanalytical tradition. Like you can heal yourself, you are affected by your parents, by the past, and you can heal by verbal rituals. And sometimes it's not enough, and sometimes it's not beautiful, and what it leads is to forgetting. That's why the focus on material and embodied engagement with the past.
Thank you both. Michal, if you have to go, we release you unless there are any more questions from the audience that you guys are able to take. Not seeing any in the chat other than several thank yous for your presentation. So,
Michal, why did you organize these roundtables in the skyscraper?
Sorry, in the skyscraper.
Yeah, I remember you organized a series of roundtables.
Yeah, some of them were in the Vysotka, the Stalinist skyscraper that I was living in Moscow at the time, in Katiemskaya Nabrzhnaya, and some of them were they were in various venues. They were in the Vysoka Szkoła Ekonomiki. Some of them were in the Triumph Gallery. Some of them were in the Museum of Architecture. So they were kind of nomadically moving about different sites in Moscow.
What was the purpose of these roundtables? Like, was it methodological or was it more informative?
No, well, it was both. I mean, I've recorded the transcripts and I make a lot of use of them in the articles and in the book that I'm writing. But also the purpose, they were organized really by the students actually, together with sort of under my with consultation, and then we invited the artists, kind of declared their interest in the project early on, and most of them attended all or most of the round table. So it was also, the idea was that their works would emerge from various phrases that were spoken during those round tables, and actually most of them did. So there were these we call them mytho-memes, and most of the artworks kind of took one of those mytho-memes as a point of departure, or invented another one. So they fed directly into the process of creating the exhibition, as well as having a kind of documentary function, as well as coalescing an audience and coalescing a discussion. So they had a kind of activist dimension as well, I suppose, although I don't think anything resulted from the activist dimension necessarily, because that idea is still there. But yeah, we should talk more about this, Fran, soon.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
both.
Matthias.
And to Igor, thank you to all the participants. So we close now, and is it right that we're back in about 1.5 hours? Am I right?
Yeah, 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock London time.
3 o'clock London time, 5 o'clock Riga time, and wherever others are. All right, thank you everyone. So let's meet soon.